Hey everybody, John Halda here, and I'm excited to have Jim Daniels. Jim, welcome.
Thank you, John.
For those of you who don't know Jim, Jim's a very well-known recruiter in the space, in the line haul space, and is the owner of JDR Solutions, has successfully worked with a bunch of line haul contractors, and Jim has graciously volunteered some of his time to talk about recruiting, the good, the bad, the ugly, that kind of stuff today, and try to share some of his wisdom and experience. So Jim, a huge thank you for taking time out of your day on a Friday, I might add, for those. I'm not sure when this will get published and when folks will watch it, but obviously a pretty day behind you. We got a little bit of sun, but we're going to power through that.
You got it, 10-4.
So we had a chance to talk the other day, and you really piqued my curiosity because you've been doing this a long time, and I realize that you probably have forgotten more about recruiting than I'll ever know. So I'm going to need your help guiding me, but I've got some questions that I'd love to get started with, if that's cool with you.
Absolutely. Please, let's get going.
I find in conversations with contractors that many of them do it on their own. And I suspect that a lot of them are making the same mistakes over and over again. Do you see that when you start working with new clients?
Absolutely. That's usually probably the number one key failure element, if you will. They're just not known what is going on in the recruiting world. Like you mentioned, a few minutes ago, I may know more than, or I may have forgotten more than you know about recruiting. Well, trust me, that's not true. But the one thing I will say is, like the rest of trucking, when you've been in it for any length of period of time, the change that trucking goes through. Well, recruiting's no different. We've gone from just a complete paper heavy laden industry of applications being faxed back and forth and all that sort of thing to, advertising and trade publications. That was the only way to do it, to just a completely almost like a retail world, a completely modernized, very heavy electronic world. And you don't see that with newer or younger type contractors that are just getting a start out.
Forgive me, you lost me. I was following you all the way till you say you don't see that with newer contractors, meaning they don't understand that it's bang bang digital, fast paced, or
Correct. Yeah. They go into it usually, with the system of, oh, hey, I've got a notebook here. I'm going to run me an ad and here I go. And if they do get a phone call from it or something of that nature, it's a scribble note written in a notepad or on a sticky note. Or today's recruiting world, and we could touch on this later, but is just so defined by having a very robust ATS or applicant tracking system. And it's the effort and tools that you build into that applicant tracking system that will not only pay dividends today for your recruiting, but even more so, and this is something I preach a lot, is don't think about recruiting today. What will the information I keep, I store, I track, what will it do for me tomorrow, next week, next month, even next year, in terms of re-engagement with candidates? Because it's much more difficult to not only engage with a single applicant today, just because of the socialness of what we've become from an electronic standpoint, ignore phone calls and things of that nature. It's just the nature of the beast. We've got to have multiple channels to be able to engage and then re-engage with our potential candidates.
somebody told me one time, I think it was a contractor who explained it to me patiently, because I'm a bit of a dunce with this stuff, but that recruiting has different phases of the process. You have an initial phase where you're advertising to create leads, get people to contact you so you can start a conversation, right? And once you do that, now you're trying to generate enough interest to get them to apply, right? And then once they apply, you're working them through the application process. And if they succeed there, they don't get forced out because of a problem. Now you're into onboarding, right?
Right.
where are the big problems for most contractors? If those are the four general stages, or is it all of them? I mean, do you want to talk about them each individually, or is there a place you want to zero in on where you see the biggest pain for most folks?
Well, let's just kind of briefly touch on all of them, because they all do have, their ups and downs, and they all do have, some recruiting keys that I will talk about. And I always refer to that entire process that you laid out as the recruiting funnel. Okay, I try not to break them apart. They're easily broken apart, but I try to lump them all in together and break them down that way. And this is something that I can really share with all contractors out there, to think of recruiting as 5 P's, the letter P. The first one is pain. You just mentioned pain. Every applicant that is contacting that contractor, whether it's a short form, an actual application, a phone call, a text, whatever it may be, is doing it for one reason. They have a pain that is causing them to reach out to you for other employment.
Oh God, you zigged when I thought you were going to zag. When you said pain, I thought we were going to talk about First Advantage, but now I'm
exactly. Well, we'll get to that. But yeah, that we need to go to the old sales handbook and understand that if my TV burns out, I need to go to the store. My pain is my TV doesn't work anymore. I need to buy a new TV. Okay. Me as a driver, I need to understand that, hey, I'm calling you because I have a pain. So second P, we know our company. So product knowledge, P, you have your product knowledge about your company. So find a third P, pleasure, meaning what do I have within my operations that can fix that? What pleasure do I have to fix that applicant's pain? Okay. We're almost through the process now. Here is kind of the 2 biggest ones that I see, smaller contractors trying to do it on their own, or just maybe contractors that have their own recruiting, but maybe need a little help and guidance. And it's the last 2 P's. The fourth one is persistence. This is where I often tell my clients, just in a consulting standpoint, whether they're using my services or not, I'll let them know, you got to check your ego at the door. Because I'll hear too many of them say, you know what, I tried to call this guy one time, he didn't return my phone call, so forget him. Okay. On paper, though, is that person a good looking applicant? Are they qualified? Do they have the experience? Everything else? Well, keep something in mind, Mr. Contractor. He does not need you. You need him. And a lot of times, and it's, these are successful business people out there, and it is easy to think that, well, I made the attempt, they should at least call me back. Well, that driver, that one applicant, is easily probably being pursued at any given time by 8 to 10 carriers. Okay. And think about it this way, another thing I preach, and we'll get down to that here in a minute, is you as maybe a newer or a smaller contractor lack 2 things. All right. You probably lack branding in the marketplace, so that applicant has not heard of you. And 2, because of that lack of branding, you lack credibility. There's a lot of bigger name trucking companies out there that already have the credibility out there. You may be the best contractor with FedEx, but unless that driver knows about you, you're just going to inherently lack credibility. But anyway, that's a big one, is the persistence, meaning, check your ego. They don't need you. You need them. Multiple attempts to contact somebody or to engage, like I like to say. And then the last one is passion. The last P is passion. When you're talking to an applicant, they can read your mindset. If you're talking to your operations manager while you're talking to them on the phone and you don't act like you have time for them today, that's a loud message coming across to these applicants. So, direct the conversation just like you and I are having one-on-one with each other. It's your company. You have passion for it. Have that come across in your voice.
Gotcha. Makes sense. You know, you talk about persistence and ego being the problem. I would tell you that it's not just ego, though. In some cases, it might just be time. For an owner of a line haul operation, more often than not, they're doing 78 different things, and they found the moment to call the driver, and the driver didn't pick up. It's not ego; they're not angry, but then 72 other crises just popped up. You know, breakdown on the highway, and some other driver's healthcare insurance claim wasn't paid, and FedEx is saying they took a decline when they shouldn't have, and that's just in 15 minutes, right? So it's not always ego, I would say, but it's the same net result, just no time to be persistent.
But 100% agree. And I like to use more just the ego portion of it, just as kind of a shock to them, to let them know, hey, maybe I do need to check myself. But I mean, John, you're 100% right. The reason I got into this from a third party standpoint to help FedEx contractors is, I interviewed 20 some different fleet owners before I started. And that was one of the major things, besides First Advantage that you mentioned a while ago, is just the time. I don't have time, so that's the reason we set up shop like we did, to take that time element away from them so they can focus on operations, which great contractors should do, focus on their operations.
Yeah, it's just so funny. I talk to so many contractors, and it's near impossible. I don't understand how they function, a lot of them, because there's so many things that require concentration and focus and time. And yet so much of their day is just constant interruptions by things that have to be dealt with now. And I mean, imagine trying to read a book, and before you could get to the end of the sentence, you had to go do something else. You wouldn't get very far in that book if every time you tried to read a sentence, you got interrupted, right?
Right.
And there are things where you have to initiate and be focused and get stuff done. And I look at these contractors trying to do this, and yet their phone is blowing up, their inbox is filling up, and there's 17 things that are happening in the background because they're being asked questions left and right by people in their office. And I'm like, how do you function that way? And it's no wonder to me that recruiting, when it's not done by someone dedicated and focused who can be reactive to the calls and the emails when they come in and the text messages, it kind of gets done in a half-baked way, and it's not very effective.
Yep. No, you're absolutely right. And that it just parallels so closely, just exactly what you said with some of the other, I call them small keys, but really they are major keys to recruiting, and one of them is just that simple word of communicate and don't assume. Usually they go hand in hand. If I'm a small contractor and I've got all the issues going on, just what we talked about, but I know I've told this applicant to, do this on this day, this on this day, this on this day, that, okay, they've got it, they're going to get it done. I hate to say it, but we need to handhold drivers through a lot of the processes, just to help them get over some of the hurdles. We know one of the hurdles is First Advantage. So, either the operator or the contractor needs to have somebody on staff or outsourced to be able to get these people through all of these hurdles. I mean, it's so important, because if you lack organization with an ATS, like we talked about, an applicant tracking system, you may not be sure where that driver is in the process. And if you're not sure, I can guarantee you they're not sure. So, communicating and non-assumption is huge.
Do you think of recruiting as a sales process?
100%.
Does it surprise you or not surprise you that most FedEx contractors aren't very good at selling?
Yes, it really does. I've met a few that came from the sales world, and they're phenomenal at it. There's nothing better than turning an applicant, right to that owner to add that credibility and watch them go to town. And then there's some I would just rather Now let us do all of the talking too.
I know a few of those that
Yeah,
lovely people, but they weren't born for sales.
exactly. Exactly. That's just not their strength.
Um, and you can't be surprised, because one of the appeals of the FedEx ground model is you don't need a sales force, you don't need marketing, because you have one customer, and that customer buys from you every week by giving you miles to run and pays you promptly. But people think, great, I'm not good at sales, I'll get into this space, and then they discover recruiting. You damn well better be good at selling.
Exactly. And just even selling yourself to the different hubs and developing relationships and things of that nature. It's vital. It really is.
Now, you've been doing this a long time, both within FedEx and before that in the general trucking space and the broader recruiting space, right?
Correct.
In the last 3-4 years with the COVID pandemic, we have seen demand for drivers far outstrip the supply, right? It's from a driver's perspective, it's been a buyer's market, right? I mean, they can name their price, they get bonuses, all these things, right? What's a bad market for drivers look like? I mean, does it get to the point where they're begging for jobs and you can be a jerk and say, I'm only taking the cream of the cream? Or is the when the pendulum swings, does it go to, there's plenty of drivers, but you still got to work? How does that work? I've never seen a situation where there's way more drivers than freight. And maybe we're not ever going to see that the way the economy is going. I don't know.
Well, just demographically, John, you hit on something. I saw it. I'm dating myself here. I saw it really from the really early stages of recruiting and operations. And it was a major carrier where, hey, we need to shut off the valves here, slow down recruiting. We got every truck filled, and we even have a waiting list almost. I haven't seen anything like that in 20 some years, with the growth of e-commerce, especially with the growth of dedicated fleets and the regionalization, and just the socio changes as it relates to driver demographics, where it was common, the best home time you were going to get is 20 days out. That was considered really good home time. Now it's, everybody wants home daily, and if I can't, and not at night, I want to be home at night. I want to run during the day and only run this and only do this. I don't think that we will ever see a time where it's a bad driver market in terms of the peaks and valleys being that low that the drivers are beating down everyone's door for a job. I just don't see it. And that, I guess the other thing to add to that, if you track industry demographics, the retiring number, the average age of driver is like 54.8 or something today. And those people are going to be leaving the industry soon. Well, that lower number of, younger people entering the marketplace to drive does not match. There's a huge gap of the ones exiting, soon to exit, and the ones entering. So that's the gap we all need to be concerned with.
Today, it's early December 2022. Do you feel that the demand and supply imbalance with drivers is starting to correct a little? It's not as bad as it was 6 months ago, or do you think it's still as tough?
It has corrected, yes, a little bit. But even that little bit is not near enough. It's still a very, very difficult market. The other thing, John, that not a lot of people either know or are aware of, and you brought up that COVID word. COVID did something else. It really decreased the appetite for people to want to team together. So, we saw behaviorally out there that, because of, or whatever your political view, it doesn't make any difference. COVID created that. I really don't want to be in the same space with another person, especially somebody I don't know. and just our socio world of, social media and everything else, people tend to want to drive alone now, as opposed to, having a team partner that they're unknown or unfamiliar with anyway. So, that's something else that is very interesting that COVID caused.
Well, and besides that, COVID also caused the pulling forward of something like 10 years of e-commerce freight volume.
Sure did.
I mean, I think the stat I heard was that freight volume for FedEx Ground increased something like 85% in 12 months.
Yep.
I don't know if that's accurate, but it was ridiculous. Everybody felt the strain, and you can't train drivers fast enough.
No, absolutely not.
In today's market, and I'm not asking for your pricing for your services, what would you tell an owner is the all-in ballpark budget they should expect to spend to get a driver in a seat these days? Is that a number you can ballpark?
Yeah, I mean, I can ballpark it there. And that is something, what is amazing, as much as that number has been tracked, John, in the industry, you will never see that same number by any institute or data amalgamation company, anything. So, the industry standard, it was always between $5,000 and $7,000 when you factor in everything, training costs, downtime of equipment, if there was, advertising, personnel costs, blah, 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 blah. And that is more so for a major carrier. It can vacillate really depending upon the size of your fleet and, and how much, and how many different variables you have associated with your fleet. What I like to do, though, I always tell contractors, when I sign them up as a client, we sit down and have at least a minimum an hour-long meeting. And I do the unthinkable. I tell each and every one of my clients, look, the most important recruiting tip I'm ever going to give you is this. And I even pause for dramatic effect. Retention is the key to your and mine recruiting. We're going to develop a relationship with every single applicant that comes in and, that we present to you. What you need to do is take that baton and understand I can spend tens of thousands more dollars continuing to recruit, or I can take the time now to make sure that this driver knows he is an important part of this company and expectations, et cetera, going forward. The other thing I'll challenge them with is communicating with their drivers, not just new drivers, but all their drivers. And they're like, man, I communicate all the time. Well, tell me about your communication. Yep, sent out 4 fleet-wide messages this week talking about this, blah, blah, blah. I said, well,
you spam them.
Exactly. Take that time and literally, and if you can, once a month, great once a week, sit down face to face. If you've got multiple hubs, well, you're a little bit bigger, maybe more difficult. If you can once a month, just get face to face, just communication. How's the wife? How's the husband? How's the kids? Blah, just literally talk to them. Don't communicate with them, talk with them. So I just want all of my contractors to understand that, that really there's a lot of little tricks and stuff that you can do in terms of engagement, re-engagement with applicants and talking to them and being on top of it. Retention is the key to recruiting. Okay,
question for you then. I've met a bunch of people who identify as recruiters in this space, right? How come there's nobody who's got a shingle hung as a retainer?
Great question. I don't know. 2 non-FedEx companies that I've done consulting for, I literally started them. I sat down with the CEOs of both companies and sat down, and they recognized their retention issues. I said, I can train your recruiters really to be the best recruiters in the industry. As it doesn't make any difference. I go, if we're bringing them in by the hundreds and you're losing them by the hundreds on the back door, you've just spent a lot of money on me for nothing. I said, let's put together a retention program let's put together a retention czar, if you will, to have somebody, a driver advocate that can sit down there and work through these issues. That's a tie-in between almost recruiting and operations, somebody in the middle, an ombudsman that can, take care of this. And both companies, we implemented small departments at both. They've been extremely successful because now they're listening, they're hearing, and they're talking to drivers. And, both of them, retention rate within a year dropped 30 to 40%.
That's a big number. I mean, that's real dollars.
That's real dollars. That's bottom line. That's cash flow. I mean, that's bottom line dollars.
I mean, don't get me wrong. If I had, statistically speaking, if I had 30 drivers working for me, if I was an owner, I would guess that there's probably a couple of them that I wouldn't be losing sleep if they quit. Right.
Absolutely.
You always have that tail that, okay,
Yep.
we made a mistake there, or they're unhappy. It started great and now it's gone sour. But the worst is when you got someone who's great and you haven't been paying any attention to them, and then they call you up and say, hey, I've decided to take a job elsewhere. You're like, what?
Yeah. Yep. Exactly. No, and again, that goes back to the key to recruiting being retention is just that. It's not for, boy, this guy's just hanging on by the the skin of his teeth with me. One more thing that happens, I'm going to have to get rid of him. To that quote unquote perfect driver that is always on time, does everything, gets all the miles, just clockwork. Pay attention to him too. Pay big attention to him too. So, and when you add just what you said, there's a couple of guys on the fence, and I don't mean to go off on this, that you do hang on to. And I can understand it from a cash flow standpoint. I've lost a couple of clients because of we filled them up and they were like, okay, hey, great. Thanks, Jim. We're all filled up. See you later. Besides retention, my other key thing is never stop recruiting, because you're always going to have that, when you get up to a decent sized fleet, you're probably almost always going to have that 1 or 2 or 3 drivers that you're hanging on to just to keep a truck full. It's not really doing you and your brand any good. So why not, instead of having recruiting full faucet, just turn it down some, but continue to recruit, because if you get some gold nuggets that come in, now you can maybe ease out of those ones that are causing you issue, or you're hanging on to that maybe you should. So.
But I mean, there is an element. If I was an owner and I had 15 drivers and I had 3 empty seats and you filled them, I can understand why they'd want to not keep spending if they think they've got all their seats full, right?
Without a doubt.
I call a plumber because something stopped up. You believe me, I want the plumber there doing what they're doing, and I pay them. I don't need to keep the plumber there on full retainer for the next one, right?
Right.
But I do hear you about always keep recruiting. There's an element, though, when a recruiter tells you that, it's kind of like, they say never ask a barber if he thinks you need a haircut.
Exactly.
I can see why, but I'd love to see I hear a guy like Randy Curick. I don't know if you know Randy.
I sure do. You bet.
Randy is just an absolute whiz at understanding this space. And he's not a professional recruiter, but he'll tell you always be recruiting. But Randy's got a big enough operation that I think the numbers make sense. Like if you had 3 drivers, your 3 truck operation, it probably doesn't make sense to be spending money and time on recruiting, right?
Exactly. Exactly. And you hit it on the head. I mean, all things being linear, it's more of a size thing. But even a smaller one, company, let's say you have 7 drivers. And when I say always be recruiting, meaning, but just like I said with a faucet, think of it as a faucet. I've got the faucet full bore right now because I'm just starting and I've got 7 trucks and I got to get them filled. Okay, we're on full bore recruiting. We get all of those trucks filled and everything's hunky-dory. Don't turn the faucet completely off. So let's scale way back. But if you turn it off and you lose that brand and that just that name out in the marketplace, that we've been doing, by shutting it off, you're going to lose potentially good applicants. So just slow it down to a trickle, and just to keep your name out there and to keep the awareness and everything else. So
now we talked earlier about the general steps that constitute the funnel, right?
Right.
where you start with a broad net and you're trying to catch fish, so to speak, and get them engaged. It's complicated, right? Tell me if I'm wrong on these things. When you talk about advertising and lead gen, you could be talking about Indeed. You could be talking about Facebook. You could be talking about Google ads. You could be talking about Craigslist. You can be talking about billboards. You can be talking about flyers, mailings, whatever, right? Email. All of that falls into that bucket of lead gen, correct?
Correct.
And to my mind, that sounds complicated and time consuming, especially if you only need a couple drivers.
Correct.
Like if I had 100 drivers, I'd probably have someone dedicated to doing all this stuff, but I need 2 drivers in the next month.
Right.
That's a lot to learn and to master and to stay on top of, right?
Yep.
I'm not trying to sell you. I just think that there's certain levels where it makes a lot of sense to work with a professional recruiter who's already got all this stuff figured out in a process, right?
Agree. Yeah, without a doubt.
Someone contacts you. I've seen presentations. The speed with which you contact them back is important, right? Critically important.
Yep.
And then my head kind of exploded as I learned more. More often than not, they're waiting on a sort and it's 3 a.m. And now you're telling me I need to be back in touch with them according to the charts and the stats I saw within 5 minutes.
Yeah, exactly.
Do I get to sleep as an owner?
Exactly. Now,
Right.
and you're absolutely right. The time, minutes matter is kind of our mantra, but those are minutes that we're paid to take care of. But you're absolutely right. Statistically, it shows that if you make the initial engagement with an applicant within 5 minutes of them submitting something during normal hours, not at 3 a.m., during, let's say 6 to 6, if something gets submitted and you're with them within 5 minutes, your chance of hiring them are 47% greater than if you wait 24 hours. Just that initial engagement. And then really close to that, if you do make initial engagement within 30 minutes, then it's still 40-some% higher than 24 hours later. The other one, though, John, that I've really got to bring up about this, because I've mentioned these words twice, and that's engagement and re-engagement, is the manner and the channels in which you engage and re-engage with drivers. I do not have the phone statistics, but I do know this. If you're not texting, you're losing. So more drivers will respond via text than they will answer that initial phone call, because it's an unknown number. They have no idea who it is, and they get inundated with phone calls. So don't ever hesitate to text. All right, that's another recruiting key. And then if you're fortunate enough to use an applicant tracking system like I do called 10 Street, there is an even more effective engagement tool in there. It's called pulse messaging. And if you have 10 Street, you can send a driver an instant message, a direct message via Pulse. And Pulse has even like a 17% higher engagement success rate than texting. But phone is still the key. All right. But that Pulse message and that text will drive the initial engagement to get the re-engagement, especially on the phone. And then once you have them on the phone, your success rate rises exponentially again. So I just wanted to make sure I threw that out.
Let's take a little detour into the ATS World, applicant tracking system, because if my research is right, you were one of the early pioneers in this space. You've helped build them, design them. You know ATSs. Is that fair to say?
Yes. Yep.
For the folks watching, you mentioned 10 Street. What are the other ATSs that you like? Or is 10 Street it? Don't even look elsewhere.
Yeah, I mean, it's going to sound like I'm a salesman for them, but yes, I flat out prefer 10 Street and 10 Street only, just because of the way that, number one, they have designed it drivers and transportation only. They didn't build it for, a white collar HR platform. Not to slam like Workday or any other, but the 10 Street was built for drivers. And Okay, well, no big deal. Yeah, but there's a lot of nomenclature. There's a lot of federal regulations that we have to adhere to within transportation that other industries don't. Everything is tailored around that. So the ease and simplification that they've made it, from clearinghouse, and now they have electronic drug testing. I can go on and on and on and on about it, but their marketing portion behind it, again, broken record Jim talking about engage and re-engage. They have these engagement and re-engagement tools within 10th Street that, make you a successful operation, make you a successful recruiter, because you can develop and engage relationships with these applicants quicker and better. So it's key.
Two things to jump in there. Am I correct in thinking that when you say engage, that means when a new driver reaches out, it helps you engage with them and communicate with them and track that, right?
Yes, sir.
Re-engage is 4 months from now, you're looking to hire, and you had previously spoken to 82 drivers in the last 6 months. They give you tools to say to all 82 of them that you didn't hire, but you might have, hey, we're actually posting another job. If you're looking, here it is, right? They make that easy.
Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly.
I understand that.
Yep.
Now, you mentioned you love 10th Street. I think very highly of 10th Street. I've met Tim Crawford, the CEO, wicked sharp guy, really nice guy, cares about drivers, cares about owners. I can't speak more highly of their platform. I have heard in the space that a lot of FedEx contractors are hesitant to use 10th Street because a lot of the functionality in 10th Street is what First Advantage does. And so you're paying for things with 10th Street that you got to deal with First Advantage anyway. I don't know if that's accurate or not. And I want to find out if that's a true statement or if that's kind of a myth we need to bust.
I'm going to call it part and parcel. There are some aspects of it. And, even though to me, 10th Street is light years ahead of First Advantage, that there is on that, there's really three sides of 10th Street. There's the exchange portion, there's the express portion. On the exchange portion, where there's driver verifications and all of that, yes, that is First Advantage. Unfortunately, it's not going to do you a lot of good to have that aspect of 10th Street. But from just the marketing side of 10th Street, of how, I've got my entire database, 50,000 drivers worth, that not just their names. All right. I have them tagged and information so that I know of those 50,000, I know 3,000 of these people, drivers, only want to do AM shifts, no more than this. I know which ones are willing to team. I know which ones are willing to train. I know which ones have what every single endorsement they have, just because of the ease of 10th Street, that you can enter this information. And again, John, to me, that's the key to an applicant tracking system is, again, not today. Like I teach my companies and my own recruiters is, don't think of it today, think of it as tomorrow. All right, think of it as next week, because now that I have all of this information, if I know that John only wants a dedicated run from, Boston to Cleveland and back, I've got it. I've got the person for him. I can go right back, re-engage with you with your pain and fix it with a pleasure, and, and re-engage with you right away. So
now I've heard that in terms of the funnel, it's a very real thing that First Advantage's user interface is so cumbersome and antiquated that it's actually a place where a lot of contractors lose applicants because they give up. It's so frustrating to put their information in.
Yep.
Could one use 10th Street to gather all that info from the driver in a mobile friendly manner, which they're familiar with, because 10th Street's been out there for ages, right? And then literally take that information yourself and put it into First Advantage for them?
Exactly what I do. There's my last key. Because I have my own 10th Street platform, and this isn't about me, and I apologize, but just that synergy, what you just said, I mean, needs spoken about. Every one of my clients, I build them their own 10th Street platform. That's what, and if I do the full service for them and put them, all of the candidates through First Advantage for them, that's what we utilize. We utilize the immediacy of 10th Street to get the information to help us to get it through the First Advantage process. You're absolutely right. Is it redundant? Yes, without a doubt. Is it the most efficient? No, but it's quicker and it helps.
But to use your semantics, you have someone coming to you with a pain, right? The goal is to know your product well enough to explain the pleasure of working with you. And the first thing you're going to do is share your pain of First Advantage with the person who came to you with pain. That doesn't seem like good marketing.
Exactly. You hit it on the head.
Do you have any experience with driver reach? Because I've heard that that's a pretty good applicant tracking system.
I have actually looked at the driver reach program, and the upgrades and changes that they have been able to make seem very good and very positive. I don't have recent hands-on experience, but I do what I've seen of their updates and things. Yes, it looks like a very nice up-to-date product.
So that's also an option for someone listening who's looking to implement an ATS, 10th Street, possibly driver reach.
You bet.
Anything else you'd mention on that before we move off of ATSs? Are there others that you'd say look at?
Not so much to look at again, because I am just kind of zeroed in on one, and it's really unfair for me to talk about it from an industry standpoint, because I will always graduate, back to 10th Street. I would say this though, consider everything that an ATS system will do for you. And I understand if you're only a 2-truck fleet that, hey, it's maybe not worth my time. But if you have expansion goals to get to 10, 15, 20, and you have an ATS that can keep all of your driver files, from training, HR can send all of that, you can communicate through it, you can re-engage with new applicants, you can tie it into your own website. Little things like that are very, very important to consider, because it's going to save you time and money later down the road.
So capturing the information from the applicant, facilitating communications back and forth with the applicant, documenting everything that you've done in a collaborative way, so that if you're trying to figure out, did anyone on my team call this driver yet? It's all in one central place, right?
Exactly.
Giving you reminders, it's time to follow up with this person, that kind of thing. Re-engaging with the whole list of people later if you've got a new posting and you want to blast it to them. That's a biggie, right?
You bet.
I'm just trying to think through the feature sets that someone would look at in an ATS and realize what it does for them, right? Do any of these ATSs automate some of the communication? Like someone does text you at 3 a.m. Do any of them immediately text back and say, hey, we got your text, we're going to reach out to you as soon as someone's in the office?
You bet they sure do. And they'll even have the immediate communication, whatever application, whatever source that they send that lead or application into or from, they're going to get an automatic message. And you could even set it up to say, as soon as it's received, I have 5 recruiters. It's set up in a round robin. It will automatically round robin that recruiter and then let John know that, hey, John, Jim Daniels has been assigned as your recruiter. He will contact you right away, type thing. So yes.
So the funnel, get them to actually raise their hand so you can communicate them with them, right? Then begin the selling process, the recruiting process, leveraging an ATS to make your life easier and more organized, right? You get to the point where they actually want to apply and become a driver. You got to get through the First Advantage thing, all that stuff, right? I don't know that it's worth going down the First Advantage rabbit hole. Everybody knows the pain there, right?
Right.
To your point, do everything you can to keep the actual applicant away from First Advantage and insulate them from it by, if you have to, doing some redundant work. Is that fair?
Yes, it is.
Take advantage of First Advantage. New rule, very new rule. You can send to First Advantage the employment verification yourself and speed the process up significantly, right?
Correct.
Okay. Does a recruiter typically continue into the onboarding after the, say, the road test, or is it now the recruiter's done? The person's getting absorbed into the process?
No, great question. And honestly, it depends on the client. And sometimes it's the client size. And I usually find it's the mid-sized ones, the not really small, but they're at now the 10 to 30 truck range where, they're growing nicely. Everything's going, they need someone's guidance and assistance to make sure, copies of driver's license, did the doubles endorsement get everything, all of that up until the road test really is where, recruiters can and should be engaged.
Okay. Here's a question I'd love to get your opinion on, and this could be totally unfounded, but I'll start with this. There's an old joke about someone who dies and he's given a choice. You want to go to heaven or hell? And he says, well, I'm not sure. Can I visit? He goes down to hell, and there's people waving and saying hello and eating food at a beautiful buffet and heading off to the golf course and the tennis course. And he goes up to heaven and people kind of sitting around reading books and playing harps, and he thinks it's really boring. So he decides on hell. He gets down to hell and it's fire and brimstone and agony and this and that. He says, I don't understand. When I came here yesterday, it was all golf and tennis and buffets and everything and cocktails. Now it's this agony. And they say, oh, yeah. Yesterday you were a recruit. Do you run into problems where contractors project and promise this is what it's going to be like to work for me, and then when the drivers get there, it's not what they were told, and they get disillusioned, disenfranchised, whatever it is, and they feel like screw this, and they're looking already within 3 months because they made a mistake? Is that a big problem, or is that not really a case?
I will say this, John, I find it a bigger problem with bigger trucking companies, non-FedEx companies, where I come from, the great big behemoths and I always
you
call
can
that,
say names, but I won't. JB Hunt, Schneider, XPO, we've all seen them, right?
Exactly. Werner, that's where you're just herded more like cattle. So boom, you're ran into an orientation room. Nobody knows your name. No, it's really more of the callous atmosphere. I don't see it near as much on the FedEx side with the smaller contractors, which is a really good thing. And it's another little thing that we try to do on our end with my company is, I mentioned earlier, when I sign you as a client, what we're going to do is we're going to sit down with you for over an hour and try to learn everything about you, because we're going to capitulate to the candidate that we are you. So we want to know everything about you. And I mean, we even fine tooth comb dig into, okay, when a driver gets to one of your hubs to do, a road test, or after he's hired, what will happen? Who does he talk to? How does he talk to them? Blah, 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 just to know those little things, because what you just said is another key of a recruiting tip that I always tell clients, and that's eliminate buyer's remorse. Just what you said. And you sit there and John decides to buy a brand new television, all right, and you get it home and you spent $3,000 on the 65-inch, blah 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 blah, and then you get it all set up and you're looking at it and you're going, and the mail comes, and then you have a dental bill, or you have this and you have that, and you're like, man, did I really make the right decision here by buying this television? We want to eliminate that. And we want our contractors to help us eliminate that as well too. So just take that buyer's remorse out, that know that they made the right decision, and go forward with it.
You mentioned something too from a marketing standpoint, and I'm kind of wondering now, and forgive me, I love all this stuff. A lot of people worry that they're competing with the big guys, right? And I tell people, turn what you think is a weakness into a strength. Yep. You've got 35 drivers. Tell them, hey, if you go work for one of those big guys, you think you're going to have the CEO's cell phone number? You think the 100%. Guy in charge is going to be able to call you because you're one of 7,000 drivers?
Exactly.
So anyway, Jim, I've been all over. What's something, or is there anything I should have asked you that I didn't? Because I get lost in the weeds here.
I think we covered quite a bit. I mean, I just wanted to be able to share, number one, that there are no secrets. Number two, just if you can understand the blocking and tackling of recruiting, you can be very successful. Use as many electronic tools as possible to help you, because that's the way drivers are used to it today. And that's the way that you're going to be effective. Understand that retention is your key. And then the last one of, like we talked about, I very heavily equate the recruiting funnel to a sales funnel,
Yeah.
but instead of ABC, I don't use ABC as always be closing. I use ABC in the driver recruiting world as always be clarifying. And especially, honestly, on the FedEx side of things. Drivers are not used to, let's go back to First Advantage, unfortunately. Drivers are not used to First Advantage. They're used to every other trucking company. You submit an application, you get sold on the product, and then you do that company themselves does the driver background check. It's not resubmitted someplace else to have, another entity do it for them, or to do it in kind of an antiquated way. So one thing I teach my recruiters and my clients that come on board is, and don't be closing, be clarifying. Hold their hand, just what we talked about on the First Advantage side. Hold their hand through it. Don't let go. Be clarifying that process the entire time. Hey, this is what's going on right now. This is what's going on tomorrow. We need this done. Always be clarifying.
So, Jim, we're going to provide for viewers your contact info so that people are interested in engaging your services. They know how to get to you. Question for you is, if there's a contractor out there who's not looking to engage, but would like your advice on what they're doing wrong or right in recruiting, is that fair game for them to give you a call to chat, or not so sure?
Absolutely.
Okay, well, wonderful. That's very generous of you. Jim, I've interrupted your Friday. You've been so kind about that. A million thanks for sharing your knowledge and wisdom with everyone. You are incredibly generous and gracious with your time. Thank you.
It was my pleasure, John, really my pleasure. And I just enjoy working with these FedEx contractors so much, because I understand the battles of cash flow, and I come from a small rural community, and I love helping these smaller contractors any way I can.
You and I are definitely singing from the same hymnal in that regard. So that's why I like talking to you so much.
Well, thank you, John. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Jim. Be well. And thanks everyone for tuning in. Look forward to seeing you on the next episode.